Hello, as Celia said, I'm Ian. I'm an accessibility specialist with a background in design and UX. So for this session, we're going to take a little look back at some recent news, some of the nice things that have been happening in the game accessibility world recently. 2021 has been a busy time in the accessibility world, so I'm just going to give you a bit of a highlights reel of the past 6 months or so, covering these areas: hardware, information, so both information for gamers and information for developers, events, games, people, and lastly, awards. Right, so it's quite an information dense talk, but I'll give you a link at the end, which is to a Google Doc, and that has URLs for everything that I'm going to mention in the talk and some more stuff besides. So first up, advances in hardware. We've had some more progress at the platform level. Both Xbox and PlayStation have been building upon the work they did with the launch of their new platforms. So they're now going further with efforts to add things like Xbox's chat transcription, quick settings menu, and visual filters, and also the PS5 adding in system level zoom functionality as well. We've had new hardware devices, things like the Praetorian Game On 1, which is a system that allows, amongst other things, eye gaze on an Xbox. The ARM cycle controller, this is a tiltable cycle interface with cycling mapped to regular controls. So that's designed as a way for people with spinal cord injuries to be able to exercise through mainstream gaming. And the accessible cockpit. This is a super accessible Microsoft flight simulator set up in Israel that's seeing great application for occupational therapy. And there's a good lesson in here too, because all of these fancy bits of kit that I've been talking about, they just map to regular controls. So for game developers, rather than designing for the hardware, it's about us designing for the people using it. So designing gameplay itself for the full breadth of human capability, as opposed to just technically supporting some devices. And last, this is a favorite of mine. This is something called the Surface Adaptive Kit. This is a set of tactile bump labels, which you can see here are attached to the ports and the cables, tactile keycaps, and also some add-ons that make manipulating the lid and the stand of laptops easier as well. So this is something that builds upon work that's done in the gaming sphere. So it's building upon the packaging for the Xbox Tactic Controller and the design considerations in the Xbox Series S and X as well. And this is going to make a tremendous difference to the experience of many PC gamers. And this has just been launched a couple of days ago. It costs £15, sorry, £20, $15. And that is the kind of assistive technology pricing that I like to see. So next, information. Firstly, information for developers. We've had EA open up their own internal info publicly through their patent commitment. This means they're sharing their patented accessibility solutions with the wider developer community free of charge. We've had training and guidelines being made for creation tools like Roblox and Unreal. We've had PlayStation sharing their inclusive language guides. The IGDA Accessibility SIG's new top 10, that's what this screenshot is of. South Korea launching a government initiative to actually produce their own state-backed accessibility guidelines. And we had a lovely video series of 60-second accessibility tips from a studio in the UK called Many Cats. DevKit by Special Effects, which is a charity, again, in the UK. This is a really lovely set of guidelines on motor accessibility, and that's been informed by the team's many years of experience working directly with disabled players. The guidance is spread across 7 topics, and they cover both interaction and gameplay, with each guideline accompanied by a series of detailed video tutorials. And there have been multiple developer resources coming out of Xbox. This includes the Gaming and Disability Experience Guide, which is a complementary supplement to the Xbox accessibility guidelines, which basically reorganizes the guidelines by disability type. And a reference called Understanding Function to Design for Disabilities, which is what this screenshot is of. This is a fantastic document that outlines how the various types of impairment work and how they relate to the demands that technology presents. And finally, and this is a big one, the announce of the Gaming Accessibility Fundamentals Learning Path. This is an accessibility training course. It provides a thorough introduction to accessibility through a set of several modules. These cover basic understanding of mechanics and barriers, the importance of directly involving the community, and the practicalities of how to go about this through user research and other means as well. There's a module on assistive technologies, so covering both software and hardware solutions external to the games themselves. Another module on the advice given in the Xbox accessibility guidelines. And lastly, a module for gaming hardware developers and designers who are looking to create more accessible devices. And this covers both bespoke approaches like the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and also just how to make general purpose devices more accessible as well. And this is hot off the press. This course launched yesterday. It's available to everyone, and it is available for free. So if there's any one thing you take from this talk, make it this, take a note of this URL, and please share it with your teams. There's a lot of good stuff in here. And of course, a vital source of information is players. And efforts here have grown too, with companies like Xbox, Rare, and Raven adding to and expanding feedback systems for players to raise accessibility issues through. And the flip side of that is, of course, information for gamers. We've seen some great steps here as well. Xbox and PlayStation have both established permanent accessibility showcases in their respective storefronts. There's also been the addition of accessibility search and filters into the family video game database website. That's a really nice website. If you haven't checked it out, I would recommend it. Also, DAGAS just launched the Accessible Games Database. This is a similar initiative. So this is aimed at enabling informed purchase decisions through cataloging accessibility functionality across a wide range of games, and then letting gamers browse them through filterable lists. And last, but by no means least, Xbox have launched a range of filterable accessibility tags on the Xbox store. This is really fantastic, and not just for players, but for developers too. It means extra discoverability, new ways for your product to stand out and be found amongst the crowded marketplace. And one last point on information, we've had a whole bunch of new data. 66% of gamers are more likely to play games that are more socially responsible. 30% of gamers in the USA and 20% of gamers in the UK identify as disabled. 7.6 million of Germany's gamers are disabled, 10% of whom use assistive devices. The number of gamers aged 55 to 64 has grown by 32% in 3 years. Are developers incorporating accessibility into their games? 31% say yes, 42% say no, 27% don't know. That's actually an improvement on last year, but it's clear that we still have a very long way to go. And the stat that you're looking at on the screen here, this was shared by Naughty Dog. They shared that 9.5 million Uncharted 4 players have played with an accessibility option enabled. Ubisoft shared some data as well on audio description. So in year one of their audio description efforts, that resulted in 56 trailers described for blind viewers. And we've had data on representation too. So from a really significant data set of 27,000 characters across 10,000 minutes of streamed gameplay, the number of characters that were shown with a physical disability was 0.1%. 0.1%. And of those 27,000, the number they found with cognitive or communication disabilities was 0. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about representation in your game. Always remember that representation and diversity includes disability. So I know that's a pretty big barrage of numbers, but again, at the end, I'm going to give you a link to that Google Doc, which is going to have links to not just these figures, but also to all of the studies that they came from as well. We've had lots happening in the event space too. We've had general industry events being made more accessible. So events like the Summer Games Fest, the Age of Empires preview event, the Xbox Bethesda Showcase, and Ubisoft Forward. They've all been adding things like sign language and audio description. This is a trailer from the Bethesda event being shown with both captions, so not just subtitles of text, but actually captions for important sounds as well, and ASL interpreting too. The interpreter here on the right is the always awesome Brad Galloway of GameCritics.com. And a quick bit of trivia for you, he is a really early pioneer of game accessibility. Game Critics started routinely including accessibility information in their reviews 20 years ago, back in 2001. We've had development events like the Games for Change Student Accessibility Challenge, like the Sumo Digital One Button Game Jam, and that was for special effects, and also the Boundless Game Jam. And tournaments for disabled gamers, like the NEAT Mario Tournament, the FIFA Xbox Invitational, the Special Olympics Gaming for Inclusion Tournament, and the Adaptive Esports Tournament from Logitech Enable Gamers. And other types of events too, like Everyone Games. This is a new online conference and streamer event focusing on blind and low vision accessibility for both digital and tabletop games. And also PC Gamer held an accessibility week. So this was a whole week dedicated to accessibility journalism from all across the industry. And a personal favorite, this was held by Xbox for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, all the way back in May. They held a dedicated storefront promotion showcasing the games that had accessibility wins at awards, specifically the Can I Play That Awards, the Degas Awards, and the Game Awards. So that takes me neatly onto the games themselves. Now, normally when I give news update kind of talks, I reel off a long list of all the games that have been doing cool things recently, but that just isn't possible anymore. There's too many. It would take the whole of the presentation just to go through the list. So I'm just going to name a few particular favorites for you to check out. And if you want a larger list, then again, there'll be a link at the end. At the moment, we are still in the immediate aftermath of The Last of Us 2. It's going to take another year or two for the impact of that game on other studios to be fully felt in games hitting release. But the momentum that's been building in AAAs over the past couple of years has continued to build. In particular, with games like Forza Horizon 5, Ratchet and Clank, and Far Cry 6, in some ways surpassing things that The Last of Us 2 achieved. And lots of other AAAs have been doing good things too, from Biomutant to Returnal, from FIFA to Psychonauts 2, from Guardians of the Galaxy to Life is Strange True Colors. So it really is at the point now where you simply cannot release a AAA game without having a solid accessibility foundation. You can't afford to be that far behind what all of your contemporaries and competitors are doing. Player expectations have just now shifted too far. And with the kind of things that are currently in development today, that shift in expectations is only going to increase. And indies have been knocking it out of the park in ever greater numbers before, in greater numbers than ever before, in no small part from the continued influence of Celeste and its progeny. Just a few that I recommend checking out are Chicory, Horror Tales: The Wine, Sunblaze, Twilight Drive, The Big Con, Severed Steel, Skatebird, Rainbow Billy, Unsighted, Unpacking, and The Veil. Again, there'll be a link at the end, not just with these games, but a whole bunch of other ones as well. So if you want to up your accessibility game, I really can't recommend highly enough that you check out the indie scene. They are really acing it, not just in the volume, but in innovative, creative approaches too. And if you are an indie yourself, make the most of the advantages that you have. Your ability to react quickly to feedback. The fact that you have full control without the huge legacy tech dependencies, without swathes of politics and internal advocacy to have to wade through to get things done. You are in a really wonderful position to drive the industry forwards, and it's actually much easier to do that than you might think. There's been an uptick in the number of older games receiving accessibility patches too. So games like World of Warcraft, Sea of Thieves, State of Decay 2, Dead by Daylight, Among Us, Fortnite, Hellblade, Baldur's Gate 3, and Gears 5. It's always better to address accessibility from the start and do things by design. But if you are in a situation where you're doing updates to an older game, it's still always worth trying to reach out and reach broader audiences through patches as well. And finally, we're seeing progress in the really old games, remakes like Zool Redimensioned and Diablo 2 Resurrected. So remakes and remasters have often been a black hole for accessibility, really just focusing on updating the aesthetics, which is a crying shame and a huge missed opportunity. Because there's two main goals of releasing an old game, right? Re-releasing an old game. Firstly, you want to broaden the demographic, attract new players in. Secondly, you want to make another sale to the original players. And this is players who are now older with very different capabilities to when they originally played. So you cannot do a good job of meeting either of those goals unless you are considering accessibility. So the fact this is now starting makes me very happy. And so does the wording of this announcement about Diablo 2. Hell welcomes all. And none of this progress is happening by accident. It's all down to people. And that includes the expansion of the industry's headcount of people who are working in dedicated full-time accessibility roles. Most recently, we've had Tara Velka moving over to Xbox Studios as their accessibility lead. Caitlin Jones, James Berg, and Elizabeth White, as I'm sure many of you know, have been doing great things for a long time at Microsoft, EA, and Bethesda, respectively, but they have now all moved into permanent, dedicated game accessibility roles. James and Elizabeth are in accessibility user research, and Caitlin is an accessibility program manager. And also we got Joe Baker. He's also joined Xbox, again, as an accessibility program manager. Not shown here is Billy Gregory, as he's not working directly on games, but I'm going to give him a shout out anyway. Billy is an absolute star of the web accessibility world, who recently joined Ubisoft to head up accessibility across all of their many websites and apps. But of course, it's not just about people in these full-time roles, it's about everybody else as well. So what accessibility really needs is a few people who know a lot, but for everybody else to know that as well. And this talk of people brings me on to the last area, which is awards. Yeah. So the kind of progress that I've been covering in this talk is being recognized. The explosion of new accessibility awards that we saw over the end of 2020 and start of 2021 has continued. We've seen accessibility categories added to a whole bunch of other award ceremonies. So we've had categories added at the New Zealand Game Awards, that was won by Trigger Witch, at the Game Audio Network Guild Awards, which was won by The Last of Us 2, at the IRL Awards, which this picture is from, that was jointly won actually by Stacey Rebecca and Doug Pennant from Sega, and Special Effects. And there are two others in particular that have really stood out for me. Firstly, the Australian Game Developer Awards. They added a category for accessibility innovation, which was won by a really lovely game called Unpacking, which Unpacking is also the perfect antidote for 2021. So if you haven't heard of Unpacking, I would recommend giving that a play. But they also have accessibility as a criteria on all of their other award categories. So if you want an award for your visuals, the judges take into account how those visuals are for people with color blindness or low vision as well. And secondly, the IGDA awards. These are new awards established this year. They're voted for by developers across the IGDA membership. And the awards list individual team members who contributed. The accessibility innovation category was won by Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So that's what you're looking at here. This is a list of individuals who contributed to making that accessibility happen. So that is great to see in itself, that kind of recognition of the individuals who played a part. But it's also a great illustration of how much of a team effort accessibility is across all disciplines. But the progress we're making isn't just about team efforts within studios. It's about a team effort across the industry, pushing each other forwards, learning from each other, sharing, collaborating. And that's what events like today are all about. That's the thought I'd like to leave you on. So there's just one last thing for me, that link that I promised with those longer lists, and the URL for that is tinyurl.com/a11y-dec. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ian. There are a few questions. I see that there's one open question in the Q&A. It's Marcello is asking, how about accessibility on mobile games? We don't see much of that. Do you have any additional information you wanted to share for mobile?
I am just trying to figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Technology, eh? Who'd work for
Yeah.
that?
UX.
Yeah, so yeah, mobile. A lot of the considerations for mobile are the same as for other platforms. There are some differences, primarily in display and input. So in terms of display, again, it's similar kind of stuff that you have to tackle when dealing with other platforms, looking at size and contrast. It's just a bit of a bigger deal if you're dealing with small screens, and also not just the form factor, but also the fact that you are viewing them in different environments. Like I'm sure everyone's experienced the joys of trying to use a phone screen in direct sunlight. If you've got any kind of vision impairment on top of that, that only amplifies it even more. So things like size and contrast are even more important for mobile. Then in terms of input, it's a bit different because you don't have a controller. It's all about a touch screen, and there's basically a like a sliding scale of complexity and demand of interactions on mobile. Different people have different needs, so it's not like a concrete scale, but generally speaking, you have just simple single taps at one end. At the other end, you've got things like gyroscope and complex multi-touch gestures, and things like swiping and pinching and zooming and stuff that sit in between that. So from the motor side, it's about avoiding unnecessary complexity. So trying to stay as far down to the lower end of the scale as possible. Like if you've got a game that really requires like 10 things to be on the screen at one time, all doing complex gestures, that's fine. But just make sure that it's really, really for a good reason, that there isn't another alternative to that. and also offering some flexibility as well. So if things like if you've got virtual controls, making sure that people have got the flexibility of choosing whereabouts on the screen they're going to use them, that kind of stuff as well.
Thanks, Ian. There's another question from Jason. I know Microsoft and PlayStation are making strides in accessibility, but is there anything from Nintendo in this area?
Yes, there is. So Nintendo have been a little bit slower than Xbox and PlayStation, but they have been making progress. So they have, God, when was it? I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. They implemented the first accessibility functionality onto the console. It was some initial considerations for vision. So it was just basic things like grayscale and inversion. They've now gone further than that. They have really, really nice, well-executed system-level zoom functionality and really good system-level remapping as well. But that when they did those first things around vision, that was a really, really important milestone for the entire industry, because that was, I'm pretty cautious about claiming that things are the first, because all that means is the first amongst the stuff that you're aware of, right? But I am 100% confident in this one that when Nintendo implemented those initial vision things a couple of years ago, that was the first time in the entire history of the games industry that every major gaming platform actually had system level accessibility considerations. So that was a biggie. So that meant Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, also iOS, Android, PC, Mac all had decent system level accessibility stuff. So yeah, Nintendo have been making some good moves. There's some nice things happening in some of their first party games as well. Things like Mario Kart have been doing some really nice things as well, which we're seeing in other games now like Forza as well. So it kind of speaks a bit to that point I was making about how actually, no, I'm not going to put it in my words. I'm going to put it in the words of John Knowles, who's the design director on Forza. So he was giving a talk about accessibility, and in that he said, it's like there is a race across the industry to develop the most accessible game. And I know a thing or two about racing, and believe me, this is a race that everyone wins. So yeah, it's nice to see all these developers from these different companies all learning from each other, and not just from seeing each other's games. Accessibility seems to be a topic where people are a lot more willing to step across and outside of the traditional boundaries that exist across the games industry, and actually have those conversations with each other and work together on projects as well. So I'd encourage everyone to do that.
Awesome. Thank you. Oops. Thank you so much, Ian. I think we don't have the time for any more questions. So thank you again for participating in the summit. It's always a pleasure to have you, and hopefully more great news on accessibility are going to keep flowing.